Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Tristian's Reef. Now, in our last episode, we went ahead and unboxed my FramingTech 350 gallon stand measuring 96 by 30 by 38 inches high. Now, in this episode, we're actually going to build the stand, and I'm going to take you guys along the way to see how that's done. First up, we're going to take a look at the tools that we're going to need to accomplish this task, and there aren't that many to begin with. Now, believe it or not, for this build, all you're going to need is an Allen wrench. But to make things a little bit more interesting, make sure to hydrate. Use your beverage of choice. Step 3 is going to be to prepare your work surface. Now, since I'm working on concrete, I decided to use the box that the pieces were shipped in as a surface to build on. Now, throughout this process, you're going to want to refer back to the diagram that you were sent prior to your kit arriving. Now, what I did to start my build is I first used the diagram to identify the pieces that I'm going to need. I outlined the top frame first on the floor and placed the pieces roughly where they're supposed to go. After that was done, I began to roughly fit the pieces together and lightly tighten them so as to give myself enough wiggle room to work. Now, FramingTech makes this pretty easy, because in the diagram and on the pieces are individual labels that will help you identify where things go. After this was done, we installed the uprights, and using a little bit of manpower from my son, we went ahead and slid the other rail in, which would complete the top surface. Now, for my stand, we decided to build it from the top up. So this means that the entire stand was built upside down and would need to be flipped back on its bottom after the build is complete. I found this to be the easiest way to deal with it. Now, one of the things that you may have to do is to bust out a measuring tape. This is not a tool that I mentioned at the beginning, but it's something that I found useful. And this is to help you get the spacing right across the top frame. Now, once the top frame is complete, it looks pretty good, and it's also fairly lightweight. When we're done with this, we're going to move on to the next part. The next part of the build required some very careful planning, because we were actually installing the vertical supports that would take a lot of the weight going down onto the floor and onto the rest of the frame. So what you want to do in this situation is to make sure you refer back to the diagram as much as possible. Installing these pieces are a lot easier since the entire top frame has already been built. Sliding these pieces together is actually pretty easy. In my case, I needed to place some pieces in between other pieces, and by leaving the bolts very loose while we were doing this and having an extra pair of hands, it made that process a lot easier. One of the unique things that you're going to find about building with this FramingTech extruded aluminum is that once you've tightened down one end of a particular piece, the other ends become very square and rigid. This means that actually installing the other pieces become very easy. Now, once you've gone ahead and tightened down all of your bolts, you're pretty much done. So to finalize this build, my last steps were to actually install the support feet. Now, these feet are adjustable, and while I received a lot of questions about these feet will support hundreds and hundreds of pounds of weight, and I have no doubt whatsoever that they will be fine in supporting the stand and all of the stuff that's going to be in it. So with the adjustable feet installed, all that was left was to turn the stand over and admire your handiwork. I also couldn't resist mocking up the actual panel coverings and how they would look on the stand once it's 100% complete. Being an engineer, I also took an opportunity to take a look at the engineering that went into this stand. And one of the things that surprised me the most was that it very much reminded me of building with wood. All of the joints were extremely solid. They transferred weight directly down to the floor and distributed it equally throughout the rest of the frame. I also looked at some of the mounting hardware that was provided for me in order to go ahead and mount those panel doors. They're magnetic and work the same way as a lot of the aluminum extrusion. They basically fit into the channels, are adjustable, and you simply tighten them down and thread the other piece into the panel itself. I thoroughly enjoyed this build. It was extremely easy, and what would have taken me days with wood ended up just taking me an hour and a half, and that was with filming as well. With the extra time, I decided to spend some time with the family and go ahead and throw some celebratory steaks on the barbecue. Guys, I want to thank you all for joining me on this build. I did leave a couple of surprises that I'm going to have and display during the unveiling of the stand. in its full entirety. But I hope you guys enjoyed this build and your look at a FramingTech stand. Now guys, Anthony is running a really awesome deal over at FramingTech. If you guys want to go ahead and head over to framingtech.com, mention Tristian's Reef for an awesome discount to get your own custom stand. With that, thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. Please like and subscribe, and do join me again for the third part of this series. I'm going to be receiving the sump, placing that into the FramingTech stand, and showing you guys just what this thing can do.